Still talking cloud gems. Let's get to work. What's up, people? MisterToolbox back talking Amazon Lumberyard. Today we're talking cloud gems and specifically the leaderboards. For those who didn't catch the MOTD video, I've moved on from 1.7 to 1.8. The first video in the Cloud Canvas series I cut on 1.7. I did go back and verify that everything I said in that video pertains to 1.8, so if you followed along through that, you should be ready to go. As is tradition, I've popped open the project configurator. I'm going to click Cloud Gem Samples, make sure that's set as default. Once I got that done, I can close the project configurator. Today we're going to check out the Leaderboards Cloud Gems. So I've got the editor open here. I'm going to click Open Level. I'm going to find Leaderboard Sample, give it a click, click Open, let it load up. Just as a quick sanity test, once you've got the level open, go ahead, click in the menu, AWS, click Credentials Manager. Make sure you've got a profile. Mine says Cloud Canvas Administrator. Yours might say Cloud Canvas Admin or whatever you set up back in part 1. Just make sure you've got a profile set and that the radio button's ticked. If that looks good, you can click Cancel and you're ready to move on. Before we get going with actually creating leaderboard tables and whatnot, I want to take a look at the Lua Script behind the Leaderboard Cloud Gem because there's a hang up in there that will really catch you off guard if you're not looking for it. Given that we're full speed ahead on the component entity train, you'll find the Lua Script on the single entity in the entity outliner. So give it a click, and then over in your entity inspector, open up the Lua editor by clicking the braces next to the script name. You get the MOTD out of the way, and we'll take a look through this script. If you're going to try to use this script unmolested, the thing to look out for is here on line 5, and that's the stat equals. So the default is set to score, and what that pertains to is the name of the leaderboard table you create in the Cloud Gem portal. We'll jump over there and do it in a second, but I named mine, I think, Jeff when I was first starting out, and I couldn't get it to load. It took me a second to dig into this script to figure out what was going on. Now let's take a look through this script. I won't hold your hand through every line. If a deep dive into Lua is something you're interested in, please do let me know down in the comments. I'm capable of it, but it's probably kind of boring for some, so we'll touch on the highlights and go from there. First up on line 10, we've got the onActivate. This Lua script activates when the game activates. And what it's doing is setting up basic UI canvas bindings and whatnot. Now, different from the MOTD implementation, where MOTD subscribed to the tick handler, this one actually subscribes to the Cloud Gem Leaderboard Notification Bus event bus on line 24. So it's a little bit different on how it goes about updating itself. We'll see that a little bit later. It also seeds MathRand on the time of your OS, which it'll need for generating random scores. Down here on line 35, we have a show top 5 sample scores. What that does is basically builds a list from 1 to 5, or 1 to 6, which is 5. Grabs scores out of the leaderboard and then updates the scores. We'll see the update score function later on, but that's going to display them to the UI canvas. Next on line 45, we have the show scores around player function. It does a lot of cool things to try to figure out the scores around the player that's submitting the scores. Only drawback here is that the only invocation to this function is commented out down on line 75 and 76. So right now it's not doing anything. Later on it'll probably be invoked when you post your scores. That said, down on line 70 we've got this onPost leaderboard request success function. What that's doing is invoking the show top 5 sample regardless of who the local user is. So if we scroll up to the top, here on line 6 we'll see the property local user. It's set to local player by default. If that's blank, it's going to show the top 5 samples, and for right now at least, if it's anyone else, it's going to do the same thing. This will get invoked when we get a callback with a successful request for leaderboard statistics out of AWS. On line 82, if for some reason your post fails, what you'll get is a handy debug log that'll shoot an error into the console telling you that it failed. It doesn't give you an error message, it'll just tell you that it failed for now. Next on line 87, we've got a handy function that submits a batch of random scores. It does that just by looping through self-submit count, which starts at 0 up to 10, generates a random name for the user, tells you it's submitting the score for that user, generates a random score, and then pops an event on the event bus to post that score. Once it's gone through that loop, it sets submit count to submit count plus 5. I can't tell exactly why that's happening. To be honest, I haven't looked at the C++ for this yet. Maybe the reason's in there. But I don't see the submit count used anywhere else in the Lua script, so I don't understand where the 5 is coming from. Anyway, this will generate random scores, which will let you populate your table really quickly and actually see this in action, so it is really nice to have. Down here on line 100, we've got the submit score for local user function. That basically grabs the name of the local user out of the properties up here at the top of the script. Again, that's set to local player by default. And it sets the value based on the incoming integer and then pops the event on the event bus to post that score. We'll see where that binds to the UI canvas in just a second. Down here on line 112, we've got the onAction function, and that's really where the Lua script binds to the canvas. So we've got action names that correspond to the action names on all of our buttons and their various bits of code. So first we've got get scores. What that's going to do is check the local username here on line 115 and then tell you it's going to add some user to the leaderboard request and then tell you it's getting the leaderboard. And then it's going to drop an event on the event bus. Now, I got curious when I saw that this event was a post leaderboard. I was curious if it was an HTTP post, so I popped open Windows Explorer. If you navigate into Dev, Gems, Cloud Gem Leaderboard, Code, Include, AWS, and then Service API, you'll find this Cloud Gem Leaderboard client component file. It is a C++ file. Friends don't let friends use Atom to edit C++, but because I'm looking, it's fine. And then down here, where was it? Line 840, we'll actually see the class. And sure as heck, it is an HTTP post. So what it's doing is posting to a Lambda call. The Lambda is then returning some JSON, and then down a little bit further, we'll actually see the return. On post leaderboard request success right here, and it's returning the score data. So you don't need to dive this far into the weeds to understand what's going on, but out of curiosity, I wanted to see if it was a post, because that seems something that would be more likely to be a get. But given that it's a Lambda function, that does make sense, because Lambda is actually running the code to get our table back for us. With that sojourn off into the wilderness complete, this kind of makes a little more sense now. On line 120, we've got a post leaderboard event, which refers back to that line 840 of the C++ we were just looking at. And because up on the top, we are connected to the notification bus, when the success or fail come back, what we've got are our functions here on line 70 and 82 to listen for those events on the event bus and respond accordingly. Really elegantly done. Down below the get score code, we've got a couple of other action handlers. We've got the random batch that submits the random scores we took a look at a few minutes ago. And then we've got a couple of submit user scores. So once we load this canvas up, we'll see we have a couple different buttons for submitting the score for the local user, that local player up at the top in the properties. And all this does is it calls the submit score for local user, and then it actually drops a float in there for the number it's going to drop in. So right up above on line 100, as we saw, you've got submit score for local user, and then it's expecting a score variable to come with it that corresponds to the 10, 25, and 50 we see down here in this block. What it does is it takes that score, sets the score obj.value to that score, and then sends that off to the event bus to actually post the score. Moving right along on line 137 and 141 respectively, we've got handlers for posting actual scores. Same sort of deal where we're sitting on the event bus and then just waiting for a success or failure to come back. Interesting to note, the failure here does actually give you the error.message, so it'll give you some hopefully helpful information about why your submission failed. Line 145, we have generate sample score. That sets some sample scores and would essentially update the scores on the canvas. One problem being that the only invocation to it on line 121 is currently commented out, so that's not doing anything for the moment. And last but not least, we've got the update scores, and that's just basically getting information off of the event bus and dropping it into our canvas. So we'll see that in action in just a second. That's it for code. I don't know if this was too painful for anybody. If it was, please do let me know. If you like this sort of thing, I can certainly do more of it. I don't know which way to go, so your feedback will be helpful. Hey, we're back in the editor. We have something fun to look at. One thing to note about some of these Cloud Gem samples as they currently are, a lot of them will show your account ID and sometimes even your credentials in the console. So don't be screwing around with this stuff if you've got Russian hackers or evil siblings or something hanging around. Just be aware of it. I mean, they come and go pretty quickly, but you don't want that stuff floating around if you've got peering eyes watching you. So let's see what this does. I'm going to click in the perspective viewport, press Ctrl G, and you'll see we've got a leaderboard canvas. Got a couple buttons to submit the batch. That's going to submit the random scores we talked about. Then we've got submitting user scores, 10, 25, and 50. Those correspond to those local player scores that we saw there at the end of the Lua script. And we've got get leaderboard. I'm going to click get leaderboard. See, it says getting leaderboard for score. And then a little while later, I get an error. I get that error because I don't have a table right now. If I click submit batch, I get a bunch of errors as well because I don't have the table. I can't submit any of those scores properly. So let's go ahead and create the table and then we'll give it a shot. So to get to our Cloud Gem portal, we'll come up to the menu, we'll click AWS, we'll click Open Cloud Gem Portal. It'll pop open our Cloud Gem portal. We'll click Cloud Gems up in the top right corner, and we'll click Leaderboard. You'll see I've got no leaderboard, so let's create one. Easy peasy, we'll click Add Leaderboard. It's going to ask for a leaderboard ID. This is where you got to put that score in, unless you've changed that value in the Lua script. Jeff certainly does not work. Take it from me. For minimum value, we'll say 0. Max value, we'll say something ludicrous, because that random score generator can be pretty high. So give yourself some wiggle room. Jam in a 1 and a bunch of zeros just to make sure it works properly, and then click Save. You'll see we've got our table here, and we are good to jump back to the editor. In the editor, I'm going to click the perspective viewport again, press Ctrl G, and then I'm going to click Submit Batch. See, I've got a bunch of submitting scores, and it's successfully submitting the scores this time. You'll see it's randomly generating 3-digit integers for the user ID, and then big ol' floats for the values of the scores. I'm going to jump back into game mode again and click Get Leaderboard. It says it's getting the leaderboard for score. We'll sit and wait for it to show up. Nothing happens. This happened to me earlier, and it brings up an interesting point. So let's escape out of here. Popped open the DynamoDB, found the table, the main table, and you can see I've got a bunch of scores in there. Let's jump back into the editor one more time and give it another crack. Press Ctrl G, get leaderboard. And nothing happens still. Let's go ahead and submit a user score of 50. That should succeed. So there it is, submitting, successfully submitted. If you jump back to Dynamo, refresh this, you'll now see that local player does have a score of 50. So before I attempt to explain that, let's jump back into our Cloud Gem portal and then open this up. You'll see I've got no scores for this leaderboard here. There seems to be a propagation delay between Dynamo and the Cloud Gem portal. I didn't see any clear documentation on it, but you will see it in one other place that makes it a little bit more explicit. I'm going to wait for a couple minutes. I'll meet you back when this is updated, and I'll show you where I found out what was going on. So I waited for 15 minutes. I saw nothing, although I was spamming requests for a get leaderboard. Came into the Lua editor, and I added one debug log just to see what was going on, I added it to the show top 5 samples, which should run after a successful request to show the leaderboard. And then as soon as I did that, I pressed get leaderboard and it's working fine. You see the output here on the canvas, you see it down in the console as well. Then if we jump over to our Cloud Gem portal, click the leaderboard, we see the score table. So I don't know if there is legitimately just a 15-minute propagation delay and I can't be bothered to wait as long as it asks, or if there's something else going on, but it seems like every time I jump in and actually mangle that Lua just the tiniest bit, then all of a sudden things start working. Let me know if you see the same thing when you're going through this yourself. One thing that makes me think there's just a legitimate delay here is if you find any of the users in your score table and you click the little circle with a slash through it to ban the user from the leaderboard table, you'll see this line down here at the bottom of the pop-up that says these changes will be reflected in the CGP for now and may take a few minutes to propagate to the server. So that may be what's afoot here. There may just really be a propagation thing. I'd love for somebody to chime in and let me know how that works. Whatever the case may be with that little quirk there, like all things AWS, this isn't magic. It's just a bunch of interconnected services. So in the leaderboard's case, it's DynamoDB, S3, Cognito, and Lambda functions. You can jump into your portal, your AWS console, and you can see all of the data getting created. You can see the Lambda functions. You can watch the invocations there. If we jump back to Lambda and pick that, for instance, you can check the monitoring tab and see the invocations as they happen. You can click on any of these to see the logs if you want to look at the logs as they run. So you still get all the feedback from AWS, but you've got this Cloud Gem portal on top of it. Kind of exposes the things you want to see as the game developer or as the manager of the community in an easy to see kind of dashboard. All in all, I think the Leaderboard Cloud Gem is a promising start. It's got some rough edges for sure as far as just blocks of code that are commented out for now and that mysterious propagation lag. But you can tell where they're going with it, and it's super nice to not have to think about how to stand up a SQL server yourself and harden it, make it redundant for something as, air quotes, simple as a leaderboard table. I expect we'll see a good focus on the AWS stuff in the next few releases, and I can't wait to see these get polished and be put to use. Alright, that does it for Leaderboard. Let me know if that dive into code was engaging or terrible. I'll rely on your feedback to see if I do more of that stuff. As always, don't forget to jump into the community Slack channel. It's growing every day. We got some cool people, a lot of people I met at GDC in there now. A lot of FBX conversation going on, so if DCC is your thing, it's the place to be. Don't forget to like, subscribe, click all the buttons on the YouTubes. If you've got any feedback, please do leave me some comments. I do read those. I try to respond whenever I see them. Anything I can do to help you make some games, I am all for, because I want to buy games to play games when I'm not making tutorials. That's it. Bye.